A little girl knocked at
Mama
midnight.
needs help.
Mama needs help. The widowed rancher. Every lantern. Winter had a way of making sound carry farther than it should. A footstep, a breath, a knock. The ranch sat alone beneath a sky stitched with frozen stars, the land around it locked in white silence. Snow had been falling since dusk, slow, patient flakes that buried fences and softened the world until even grief felt muted. Lantern light bled from the windows, amber against the cold, because the man inside never let the dark win completely, not since it had taken too much already. Ethan Cole was awake when the knock came. He always was. Midnight didn't surprise widowers. Sleep never trusted them enough to stay. The sound reached him through the wind, 3 soft taps, uneven, almost apologetic. Not the firm knock of a traveler, not the drunken pound of a lost ranch hand. This was lighter, fragile, as if whoever stood outside feared the door might bite back. Ethan's hand froze around his tin cup. The coffee inside had gone cold an hour ago. He didn't move right away. Out here, hesitation was survival. Winter bred tricks, wind against wood, branches brushing wrong, the mind filling gaps, loneliness carved. Then came a voice, thin, trembling, barely there. "Mister, Mama needs help." The cup slipped from his fingers and struck the floor, spilling dark across the boards like a spreading bruise. He crossed the room in 3 strides, shrugging into his coat, lifting the lantern from its hook. When he opened the door, Winter lunged inside, sharp and biting, carrying snow and night with it. A little girl stood on the porch. She couldn't have been more than 6, maybe 7. Her hair was a tangled curtain of frost-dusted brown, her cheeks raw and red from the cold. She wore a thin dress beneath a coat that wasn't hers, too big, sleeves swallowing her hands. Her boots were mismatched. One lace dragged loose in the snow. Behind her stretched nothing but white fields and dark trees. Ethan lowered the lantern, light spilling over her like warmth given shape. "Easy," he said softly, voice rough from disuse. "You're all right now." She looked up at him with eyes too old for her face, eyes that had seen fear and learned its language early. "She won't wake up," the girl whispered. "Mama won't wake up, and it's so cold." That was all it took. Ethan stepped aside, ushering her in, shutting the door against the storm. The warmth hit her like a wave. She swayed, knees buckling, and he caught her just in time. She was light, too light, and shaking hard enough he could feel it through his gloves. He carried her to the fire and wrapped her in a blanket, kneeling to her level. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, fingers clenching the wool. "Clara." "Clara," he repeated, grounding the name. "I'm Ethan. You did right coming here." Her lips trembled. "Mama said, if anything happened, knock on the ranch with the big oak fence." His chest tightened. His fence, his land. "How far is your home?" he asked gently. She lifted one small hand and pointed toward the dark. "Past the creek, the little house, the roof leaks." Ethan didn't waste another second. He set more logs on the fire, grabbed his heavy coat, boots, and rifle out of habit more than fear. He lifted another lantern and pressed it into Clara's hands. "Hold this tight," he said. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though exhaustion weighed on her like lead. He opened the door again, and winter roared its displeasure. Snow had thickened, the wind sharper now, howling low across the plains. He lifted Clara into his arms instead. "We'll be quick," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "I promise." They moved through the night, lanterns cutting twin paths of light through the storm. The world felt narrowed to breath and crunching snow and the small weight of a child clinging to him like he was the last solid thing left. The creek was half frozen, black water whispering beneath a crust of ice. Ethan crossed carefully, boots finding memory where sight failed. Beyond it stood the house, a sagging structure hunched against the cold, one window glowing faintly, like a tired eye refusing to close. Inside, the air smelled wrong, stale, heavy. A woman lay on the bed near the hearth, blankets pulled tight around her still form. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue, dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat turned cold. Ethan knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. There was a pulse. Weak, but there. "She's alive," he said, relief threading his voice. "You hear that, Clara? Your mama's still here." Clara let out a sound that was half sob, half prayer. Ethan moved fast, stoking the dying fire, checking the woman's breathing, recognizing the signs. Fever breaking wrong, cold settling where it didn't belong. Pneumonia, most likely. Winter's quiet killer. He wrapped her in more blankets, lifted her carefully. "We're taking her back to my place," he said. "It's warmer. I've got medicine. She needs heat." Clara nodded fiercely, wiping her face with her sleeve. The walk back felt longer. Snow thickened, clinging to Ethan's lashes, icing his beard. His arms burned, but he didn't slow. He remembered another winter, another night, another body he'd carried too late. Not this time. At the ranch, he laid the woman in his own bed, stoked every fire, lit every lantern. The house glowed like a beacon against the dark, light in every window as if daring death to come closer. He worked through the night. Cool cloths, measured sips of broth, whispered reassurances he wasn't sure she could hear. Clara sat curled near the fire, eyes never leaving her mother, fingers gripping the blanket like it was the only thing anchoring her to this world. Just before dawn, the woman stirred. A breath hitched, then another. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, confused. "Clara?" she rasped. "I'm here." Clara was at her side instantly, small hands clasping her mother's. "I got help, Mama. I told you I would." The woman's gaze shifted to Ethan, fear flickering briefly before exhaustion swallowed it. "You're safe," Ethan said quietly. "Both of you." Outside, the storm began to ease. Snow slowed, wind softened, winter loosened its grip, just a little. Ethan stepped back, watching the two of them cling to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, and felt something stir in the hollow places he'd boarded up years ago. The knock at midnight hadn't just brought need to his door. It had brought life back with it. Morning came slow and pale, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the world wrapped in a thick, breathless quiet. Frost glazed the windows, turning the outside into a blurred painting of white and gray. Inside the ranch house, lanterns still burned low, their flames steady from a night without rest. Ethan sat at the small table, elbows braced, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. He hadn't slept. He rarely did, but this was different. This was watchfulness, the kind that kept a man upright even when his bones begged for surrender. On the bed, the woman breathed. It was shallow, but even now, color had crept back into her cheeks, faint as dawn itself. Every so often her brow tightened, and Ethan would rise, adjust a blanket, place a cool cloth across her forehead. He moved with the care of someone handling something already broken once. Clara slept on the rug near the hearth, curled tight like a kitten, her thumb tucked into her mouth. Ethan had tried to carry her to the spare cot, but she'd clung to the blanket and murmured, "Don't leave, Mama." So he hadn't. He watched them both, the firelight shaping their shadows against the wall, and felt the house change around him. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden, just a shift, like air moving where it hadn't in years. The woman woke just after sunrise, her eyes opened slowly, as if she were climbing up from deep water. Confusion clouded her face, then fear, sharp and immediate. She tried to sit up and winced, a breath catching painfully in her chest. "Easy," Ethan said, already beside her. "Don't move too fast." Her gaze locked onto his, panic flaring. "Where's my daughter?" Ethan stepped aside, gesturing toward the hearth. Clara stirred, sensing something before hearing it. She sat up, hair wild, eyes blinking. The moment she saw her mother awake, she was on her feet. "Mama!" She scrambled to the bed, climbing up awkwardly, burying her face against her mother's shoulder. The woman wrapped her arms around the girl, tears spilling freely now, breath hitching as if she'd been holding it for days. "Oh, thank God," she whispered. "Oh, Clara, I thought—" "I went to the ranch," Clara said quickly, as if afraid the truth might disappear if she didn't say it fast. I told you I would if you didn't wake up. He helped. He brought you. The woman looked up again, really seeing Ethan this time. Her eyes were sharp, despite the weakness, measuring him the way frontier women learn to do early. Not suspicious, just careful. Thank you, she said hoarsely. I don't even know your name. Ethan Cole, he replied. You're welcome. She swallowed, nodding once. I'm Margaret Hale. He recognized the name. Not personally, but the shape of it. New widow, if memory served. Her husband had died 2 winters back hauling timber through the pass, left her with a small house, a leaky roof, and a child too young to understand loss, but old enough to feel it. You were very sick, Ethan said. You still are. You'll need to stay warm. Rest. Margaret's lips curved faintly. You sound like you've done this before. Ethan didn't answer right away. He stood, went to the stove, poured fresh water into the kettle. The silence stretched, not awkward, just waited. I've watched winter take people, he said finally. That's all. Margaret studied him, then nodded, understanding more than he'd said. The day settled into a rhythm shaped by care. Ethan made broth. Clara insisted on helping, standing on a stool to stir while he supervised, her small face set with fierce concentration. Margaret slept and woke in short stretches, each time a little stronger, each breath less labored than the last. Snow slid from the roof in heavy sighs. Sunlight crept across the floor in thin bands. Outside, the world felt distant, held at bay by fire and walls and human presence. By afternoon, Margaret could sit up without coughing. She leaned against the headboard, watching Ethan fix the latch on a loose window. You live here alone? She asked quietly. Yes. No family? Not anymore. She didn't press. Instead, she looked around, the clean floors, the neatly stacked wood, the extra blanket folded on a chair like it was waiting for someone. You keep a good house, she said. Ethan gave a small shrug. Habit. Clara climbed onto the bed beside her mother, then pointed toward him. He lit all the lanterns, she said with awe. All of them, even the ones outside. Margaret's brow furrowed. Why? Ethan tightened the latch, then turned. So the dark would know it wasn't welcome, he said simply. Something shifted in Margaret's expression. Gratitude deepened into something quieter, something heavier. By evening, the wind returned, not howling, just persistent, whispering around the eaves like a question it wanted answered. Ethan fed the fire again, then stepped out to check the barn. Snow crunched beneath his boots, the cold sharp enough to bite. He paused halfway across the yard. Lights, far off beyond the creek, 2 of them, maybe 3, lanterns moving. His spine stiffened. Travelers sometimes passed through, but not often this deep into winter, and not at dusk. He scanned the dark, instincts old and honed, pulling tight inside him. By the time he returned inside, Margaret was awake again, Clara dozing against her side. Someone's out there, Ethan said quietly. Could be nothing, but I want you to stay here. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Are we in danger? Not yet. He reached for his rifle, checking it with practiced ease, then hesitated. He remembered Clara's knock, the way fear had sounded in her voice. He set the rifle down, close but not in hand. If whoever was coming needed help, he wouldn't meet them with a barrel first. The knock came minutes later. This one was firm. Ethan opened the door part way, lantern raised. 2 men stood outside, bundled against the cold, horses steaming behind them. Their faces were rough, weathered, eyes sharp with the kind of hunger winter carved into men who didn't plan well. Evening, one said. We saw the lights, thought someone might be in need. Ethan studied them. We're fine. The other man glanced past him, eyes flicking toward the warmth inside. Looks like you've got company. Family, Ethan said evenly. The men exchanged a look. Road's bad, the first said. Could use a place to warm up. Ethan felt the weight of the house behind him. A sick woman. A child. No, he said. The word landed hard in the cold air. The man's jaw tightened. Winter's a cruel thing to turn folks away. So are men who don't take no, Ethan replied. Silence stretched. Then the second man lifted his hands slightly. Didn't mean offense. They backed away slowly, lanterns bobbing as they mounted their horses and disappeared into the dark. Ethan closed the door, locking it. Inside, Margaret watched him, concern etched deep. They didn't feel right, she said. No, Ethan agreed. They didn't. That night, he slept in a chair by the bed, rifle within reach, fire kept low but steady. Clara slept between them, her small body a warm anchor. When morning came, bright and cold and clear, Margaret felt strong enough to stand. Ethan helped her to the window, sunlight spilling over her face. I don't know how to repay you, she said quietly. Ethan looked out over the snow-covered land, breath fogging the glass. You already have, he said. She frowned slightly. How? He glanced down at Clara, laughing softly as she traced shapes in the frost. You knocked, he said. Most folks don't anymore. Margaret followed his gaze, understanding blooming slow and deep. Outside, the ranch stood quiet and lit by winter sun, lanterns extinguished at last. But something else glowed there now. Something warmer than fire. Something that had waited a long time to be woken. Winter tightened its hold after that. The sky stayed low and pale for days, clouds hanging heavy like unspoken words. Snow came again, soft at first, then thicker, layering the land until the fences disappeared and the road became a memory only Ethan's boots remembered. Margaret stayed. At first, it was necessity. Her lungs were still weak, her strength unreliable. The doctor in the nearest town wouldn't risk the trip until the weather broke, and Ethan wouldn't risk her life trying to move her before then. But after a while, necessity blurred into something quieter. Routine. Mornings began with the sound of Clara's bare feet padding across the floor, her laughter cutting through the hush like birdsong. She helped Ethan with the animals, bundled up so thoroughly she waddled more than walked. She named the chickens after constellations she'd learned from a book her father once read her. Orion was the boldest. Cassiopeia pecked at everyone. Margaret sat by the window those mornings, mending seams, her color slowly returning. She watched Ethan move through his chores with steady purpose, never rushed, never idle. A man shaped by loss, but not ruined by it. One afternoon, as snow whispered against the panes, she asked him, "Why don't you go into town more often?" Ethan was repairing a broken chair leg, hands sure as he worked. "Nothing there for me." "There used to be," she said gently. He didn't deny it. That night the wind rose hard, rattling the shutters like something trying to be let in. Clara crawled into Ethan's lap by the fire, clutching her blanket. "Tell the lantern story." "Lantern," she demanded. Ethan arched a brow. "Lantern story?" "The one where you make the dark mad," she said seriously. Margaret smiled from the table. Ethan sighed, but there was no real resistance in it. "It's not much of a story." "Still," Clara insisted. "Tell it." He stared into the fire, flames dancing in reflected amber in his eyes. "After my wife died," he began slowly, "the nights got loud, louder than they should have been. Every sound felt like it was coming for me. So I lit the lanterns, all of them. Told myself if the dark wanted something, it'd have to walk through the light to get it." Clara considered this. "Did it?" "No," he said quietly. "It never did." Margaret's needle paused mid-stitch. Winter nights grew long, but the house no longer felt empty. Meals were shared. Silence, when it came, was companionable instead of sharp. Ethan found himself listening for footsteps that weren't his, for breathing that wasn't memory, and still, winter tested them. One evening, Clara spiked a fever. It came on fast, stealing the color from her cheeks, her small body burning and shivering at once. Margaret panicked, fear raw and unhidden. "She was fine this morning," she whispered, pacing. "Oh, God." "Ethan!" He moved with calm that came from hard-earned scars, cool cloths, measured sips of water, fire stoked just right. He stayed by Clara's side all night, Margaret beside him, her hand gripping his sleeve like it was the only solid thing left. At dawn, the fever broke. Clara slept, exhausted but peaceful. Margaret sagged against the chair, tears finally falling, silent and unstoppable. Ethan handed her a cup of tea. "You didn't leave," she said hoarsely. "No, you didn't have to stay up." "I know." Their eyes met, something unspoken passing between them, an understanding born not of romance, but of survival. Days later, the knock came again. Not at midnight this time. Late afternoon, snow falling in lazy spirals, the light already fading. Ethan felt it in his gut before he heard it. He opened the door to find the same two men from before. Their smiles were thinner now. "Thought we might try again," one said. "Road's cleared some." Ethan didn't step aside. "I told you no." The other man's gaze slid past him, sharp and searching. "Heard there's a woman and a child here. A lone man can make his own choices. Families, well, they need protection." Ethan's voice dropped. "Leave." The man smirked. "Or what? Or everything I've already buried," Ethan thought. Margaret appeared behind him then, wrapped in a shawl, Clara clutching her hand. She met the men's eyes without flinching. "We are protected," Margaret said evenly. The men hesitated, something in her tone unsettling them. Ethan didn't wait for another word. He stepped forward, lantern raised high, its light flaring bright against the gathering dusk. "Go," he said. "Now." They went. The door shut hard behind them, the bolt sliding home with finality. Margaret exhaled shakily. "They'll come back." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but not tonight." That night, he lit every lantern again. Margaret stood beside him on the porch, watching the light spill out into the snow. "You didn't do this just for the dark," she said softly. "No." "For us?" He nodded once. Winter began to loosen its grip not long after. The clouds broke. The sun returned, tentative but real. Snow melted from the fence posts, revealing the land beneath, patient and waiting. Margaret grew strong enough to walk the yard, then the barn, then the creek. Clara followed Ethan everywhere, asking questions about stars, about horses, about why some people stayed and others didn't. One evening, as the sky burned pink and gold, Margaret stood beside Ethan at the fence. "I should go back," she said quietly. Ethan felt the words land, heavy and expected. "The house," she continued. "It needs fixing. Life needs continuing." He nodded. "I can help you repair it. When the ground dries." She studied his profile, the lines carved by years of endurance, the eyes that had learned how to hold grief without letting it drown him. "That's not what I meant," she said. He turned then, meeting her gaze. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything neither had dared name. "I don't know what this is," Margaret said finally. "I just know we're alive here. All of us." Ethan's breath fogged in the cooling air. "So am I." She reached out, tentative, and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, slow and sure. It wasn't a promise. It was an agreement. That night, the lanterns stayed unlit. The dark didn't come for them. It never did when light lived somewhere deeper. Winter did not leave all at once. It lingered like a guest, unsure whether it had overstayed its welcome. Cold mornings, brittle air, frost still clinging to shaded ground. But the worst of it had passed, and everyone on the ranch could feel it. Even the land seemed to exhale. Ethan noticed the changes in small ways. Clara no longer shivered when she ran outside. Margaret's cough faded into memory. The creek began to sing again beneath thinning ice. And at night, when the house settled into its quiet, the silence felt kinder. But peace, Ethan knew, had a way of drawing attention. The men returned 3 days later. This time they didn't knock. Ethan was in the barn when he heard the horses. Fast, careless, angry. He straightened slowly, every muscle tightening. Outside, a shout cut through the air, sharp and deliberate. "Cole, we know you're in there." Ethan stepped into the open, the barn door creaking behind him. Margaret appeared on the porch, Clara just behind her, eyes wide but steady. The same two men dismounted, joined now by a third, older, harder, his face worn into something mean by years of getting his way. He wore a badge, tarnished and self-bestowed, hanging crooked on his chest. "This is your last chance," the older man said. "You're harboring folks who ain't yours. Woman's property's her own problem. Child, too." Margaret's hand tightened on Clara's shoulder. Ethan stepped forward. "They're under my roof. That makes them mine." The man snorted. "World don't work that way." "Mine does." The tension stretched thin as wire. "You can't keep hiding," the older man said. "Sooner or later someone stronger comes along." Ethan met his gaze without blinking. "Then sooner or later someone bleeds." The man laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You're a stubborn one." "Still here," Ethan replied. "That ought to tell you something." For a long moment no one moved. Wind whispered through the dead grass, carrying the scent of thawing earth. Clara shifted behind Margaret, her small fingers curling into fabric. Then the older man spat into the dirt. "This ain't over," he said. "Winter or not." They mounted up and rode off, their silhouettes swallowed by distance. Margaret exhaled slowly. They meant it. "I know," Ethan said. That night, the lanterns burned again, not out of fear this time, but resolve. Margaret stood beside Ethan as he lit the last one, her shawl pulled tight, her posture straight. "You can't keep fighting them forever," she said quietly. "I don't plan to," he replied. She studied him. "Then what do you plan?" He looked out across the land, his land, patched with snow and promise. "To stop running from what I already lost." Spring announced itself in fits and starts. Mud replaced snow. Birds returned in tentative flocks. The first green pushed stubbornly through the soil near the fence line, fragile but determined. Ethan rode into town for the first time in months. Margaret had insisted on coming. Clara perched proudly on the wagon seat between them. The town was the same as ever, dusty, loud, full of people pretending winter hadn't taken something from them. Word traveled fast. By midday, the men had learned Ethan wasn't alone anymore. By evening, the older man with the badge confronted him outside the general store. "You think bringing them into town makes you safe?" The man sneered. "No," Ethan said calmly. "I think it makes you visible." The sheriff, real badge, real authority, watched from the porch. He'd heard the rumors, seen the looks. The older man muttered something under his breath and walked away. It wasn't victory, but it was ground gained. That night, back at the ranch, Margaret stood in the doorway watching Ethan unload supplies. "You stood differently today," she said. He glanced up. "How so?" "Like a man who knows what he's defending." He wiped his hands on his trousers. "I do." She hesitated, then spoke. "We could leave." The words hung there, heavy but honest. "Start somewhere new," she continued. "You don't owe this land anything." Ethan considered it. Then he shook his head. "I buried too much here to walk away again." She nodded slowly, understanding settling deep. "Then we stay." The decision felt solid, permanent. Winter made one last attempt to remind them of its power the following week. A sudden storm rolled in without warning, wind screaming, snow falling sideways. By nightfall, the ranch was cut off again. The world shrunk to firelight and howling dark. But this time, fear didn't follow. They gathered in the main room, Margaret reading aloud by lantern light, Clara tracing letters beside her, Ethan repairing a harness by the fire. A knock came at the door. Not loud, not desperate. Ethan stood, calm but alert, opening it carefully. A young man stood outside, half frozen, face pale, eyes wide. "My horse went down," he said. "Didn't know where else to go." Ethan stepped aside. "Come in." Margaret rose immediately, setting water to boil. Clara fetched blankets without being asked. The young man stared, astonished. "You didn't even ask who I was." Ethan shrugged. "You knocked." The storm passed by morning. The young man left with thanks and supplies, shaking his head in disbelief. Margaret watched him go. "You're changing things," she said. "Maybe," Ethan replied. "Or maybe they were always meant to be this way." Spring came properly after that. Grass reclaimed the fields. The creek ran full and clear. The house breathed easier, windows open, light pouring in. Margaret's old home was repaired, but they didn't move back. Instead, one room at the ranch quietly became theirs. No ceremony, no announcement, just presence. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and fire, Clara ran ahead of them to the fence line. "Look," she called. "The lanterns!" Ethan frowned slightly. He hadn't lit them. But there they were, softly glowing, catching the last of the light, reflecting it outward. Margaret smiled. "You don't need to light them anymore." Ethan followed her gaze, to the house, to the open door, to the sound of a child laughing inside. "No," he agreed softly. "I don't." Winter had knocked at his door once, bringing fear wrapped in a child's voice. He had answered with light, and somehow, without meaning to, he had kept it. Spring did not arrive with a trumpet. It came quietly, like everything else that mattered. The last of the snow melted from the north fence first, retreating into the soil as if it had never claimed the land at all. Mud followed, then green, thin at first, fragile, but stubborn in the way only life could be. Ethan noticed it early one morning while fixing the gate. A blade of grass had pushed through where winter had split the earth. He crouched there longer than necessary, fingers brushing the ground, as if the land itself had spoken and he didn't want to interrupt. Behind him, the house was awake. Margaret moved through it with a kind of belonging that needed no permission. She brewed coffee the way Ethan liked it, strong, no fuss, and hummed softly while she worked. Clara sat at the table, tongue between her teeth, practicing her letters with fierce concentration. Ethan straightened, breathing in the morning. This was not the life he had imagined when the dark was loud and the nights were empty, but it was the life that had found him anyway. The trouble did not come back the way he expected. There was no gunfire, no shouted threats in the night. Instead, there was a meeting in town. The sheriff rode out one afternoon, his hat pulled low, his expression careful. "Thought you ought to know," he said, dismounting. "Badge man you had trouble with. Turns out he wasn't just pushing you. Been pushing others, too." Ethan leaned against the porch rail, listening. "He's gone," the sheriff continued. "Ran south before we could put cuffs on him. Took his friends with him." Margaret stood in the doorway, Clara at her side. "So it's over?" Clara asked, hopeful. The sheriff smiled faintly. "For now." After he left, the ranch felt lighter, not safe in a foolish way, but settled, like a storm that had chosen another direction. Weeks passed. The land woke fully. Calves were born. The creek swelled. Birds nested in the eaves like they'd always belonged there. Clara learned to ride with fearless delight, laughter echoing across the fields. Margaret planted a small garden beside the house, hands deep in the soil, hope pressed right alongside the seeds. Ethan watched it all with a quiet awe he never spoke aloud. One evening, as the sky bruised purple and gold, Margaret stood beside him at the fence. "You know," she said, "I didn't think I'd ever feel rooted again." He nodded. "Me neither." She turned to him, eyes searching. "Is that what this is?" But he took his time answering. "Yes," he said finally. "I think it is." She smiled then, not the careful smile of a woman surviving, but the easy one of a woman living. That night the lanterns stayed dark, not because Ethan had forgotten them, because he didn't need them. The knock came anyway, soft, respectful. Ethan woke instantly, heart steady. He pulled on his coat and opened the door. A boy stood there, older than Clara, younger than trouble, mud on his boots, fear in his eyes. "Sir," he said, voice tight, "our wagons broke down. My ma said you might help." Ethan stepped aside. Margaret was already awake, already moving. By morning the wagon was fixed, breakfast was shared, gratitude exchanged. When the family left, the boy turned back once, eyes wide. "You're the man with the lights," he said. Ethan watched them go, words settling deep. The man with the lights. Years later, Clara would remember winter as a doorway. She would remember snow and fear and a knock she almost hadn't made. She would remember a man who opened the door without asking who she was first. She would grow tall and strong, her laughter still loud, her courage still fierce. She would leave the ranch one day, chasing a life shaped by choice instead of survival. But she would always come back. Because some places are not just homes, they are beginnings. On a clear evening, long after the last frost had surrendered, Ethan stood alone on the porch. Margaret joined him, slipping her hand into his without ceremony. "You ever miss the quiet?" she asked softly. He considered the question honestly. "No," he said. "I miss who I was before I learned how to answer a knock." She leaned into him, head resting against his shoulder. The stars came out one by one. Somewhere in the distance, a lantern flickered. Not his, but another rancher's, another house, another light, answering the dark. Ethan watched it glow. Once he had lit every lantern out of fear. Now he knew better. Light wasn't something you used to push darkness away. It was something you kept burning so others could find you, and if they knocked, you opened the door. Always.